Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the 817 podcast. I'm Jimmy here with my co-host EJ.
What to do?
And we are excited to dive in and talk everything Fort Worth: news, politics, trends, business, culture. EJ, did you survive the weekly Thursday storm?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to get my loss out of the way. I'm just going to do it now. So what we all, for those of you who are new, we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, and a win and loss for the great city of Fort Worth. But I'm just get to my loss. All right. I was stuck at the stockyards for the hailstorm. But let me give you some more context of how much I really hate the stockyards. So our head of content for our company, he was in town, and his brother-in-law came, never left Ecuador. Left Ecuador. He's 22 years old. I was like, okay, I got to take these people to the stockyards. We went and had Panther City Barbecue. Then we went to the stockyards. And shout out for Panther City Barbecue for giving us twice as much, because I just said, Ecuadorian guy never had Texas barbecue. And they definitely gave us more than we ordered. But I was there, and we were watching a little act. There's that little old act in the thing, and they're shooting guns, and it's spring break, and it's all these little kids watching these old guys shoot guns. And I was like, I got to effing leave this place. And then then there was 60% off children carry encasing vest out in the front. People were all like, this place, So at the end of the day, though, he loved it, and left with a "Let's Go Brandon" koozie and a cowboy hat, and he had a blast. But at the end of the day, I was stuck there, and I was like, gosh, I hate this place so much. But you were stuck there.
Yeah, well, I just had to pick up my wife from work there as the tornado sirens were going off. But my sister was in town this week, and, she lives up in Alaska now, and, she wanted to go to Joe T's and whatever. And honestly, margaritas at Joe T's always great. The food this time was better than I've had in a while there, but my sister's like, we got to get queso. Their queso tastes like clam chowder. I was like, man, I can't believe so many people come and eat this, that this is what they're looking forward to.
Yeah, look at these concealed carry vest discounts, and they had a kids section. So I had to leave that place. It's you got these old people shooting guns, kids around a circle. I'm just PTSD from everything else that goes on in Texas with guns. And then they got carry concealed vests. Is the elephant head really true? Is that store where it's everything's actually real? It says sign, everything's actually real, and there's an elephant, dead elephant.
No, I've never been in there.
Yeah, it was insane. You can buy some rugs and stuff in there. Oh yeah, but that place. But hey, he had a good time. He thought he was actually in Texas. So, but that's my loss. The stockyards. So, I might be the mayor of anti-stockyards, but it's fine. Look at this.
Oh my gosh.
Look at that, the elephant. And it says, yes, this elephant is real.
I hate that.
I know. They had a lion. They had everything in there.
Big
a hippo?
Game hunters.
A hippo? Gosh, it was wild, man. It's crazy out there in the streets. But all right, let's get to the show. Let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to give an update on education. So last week, which a lot of you guys told us last week was your favorite episode. Me and Jimmy wish we knew what formula we hacked to make that your favorite episode. But honestly, that was all off the cuff. So, hey, it's good tangoing with you, my friend. Now, one of the stories we had was about Fort Worth ISD and the coming of cuts that could come to Fort Worth ISD. A leak in I guess Fort Worth ISD Watchdog, an anonymous run page that frequently posts about the school district, posted audio about a behind closed door meeting on March 10th with top administrators that announced more than 100 employees, including administrators, that their positions will be eliminated for 2023-2024 academic school year. This means this will include campus staff, so people at the schools. Which I think the update there is last time we heard it was going to look like more of the administrative building. We were looking at our ratios between students and staff. I mean, the data is just scary. I mean, the data is really just scary. Since 2017, Fort Worth ISD has lost an average of 2,436 students per year. In the pandemic, it was over 6,000 students in 2020-2021 school year. So we're down. I mean, 38 campuses each lost more than 25% of their enrollment in the last decade. So I know we have to figure out how to build more sustained schools, especially I know it's weird because we're getting all this funding right now. There's a lot of funding right now, but what does that look like when the funding goes away? How does Fort Worth come out past after all the stimulus dollars? So there's a lot of work on the plate, but I just want to kind of give an update there. Any thoughts?
The new superintendent definitely has her work cut out for her. That's for sure. I mean, like this article from Fort Worth Report says, like there is no end in sight for the decline. Like we're consistently looking at about 2,000 students a year. And so what's the next step? And then like, what do we do with if we're going to try and if consolidating schools might be one of the answers, what are we doing with those buildings? Affordable housing might be a nice like way to pivot some schools if we're in need of consolidating. But
yeah, about 1% of traditional public schools shut down each year, according to this Economist article. However, in charter schools it's 5%, and private schools is 3%. But we're probably going to see that number rise in our lifetime. So yeah, we'll see. But we also got to see like this is not just a Fort Worth issue. I mean, we're definitely seeing it the most out of a lot of Texas cities. But Chicago's public schools has lost a fifth of its pupil in the last decade. Los Angeles has lost a quarter as well. And district leaders across the country are seeing that this is something that's going to continue throughout this next decade. Honestly, I think Fort Worth ISD is low-key sleepy, like some of the best, like because the buildings are so big and the facilities are actually there. It's like imagine a school with 50% of the kids there. I mean, I'd go like it's actually kind of cool. Feels very like an awesome place to learn.
Yeah, and long term, like we've had declining birth rates for a while. Now they're declining even faster than they have been. So anything that happens now can and should be long-term focused of even if Fort Worth and North Texas are growing, how much are we actually going to be growing in school-age kids, even as a young city?
Yeah. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive into the next story.
Yeah, a startup video game company is considering moving to Fort Worth, and the city wants to offer $1.5 million in incentives to help bring it to the area. Probably Monsters Incorporated, which I love that name, is a startup founded by the former president and CEO of Bungie Incorporated. So they're expected to vote soon on the incentive package on March 21st of this coming Tuesday. It would bring 300 jobs with an average salary of $75,000 in 5 years, according to the agreement proposal. The agreement would also require 30% of hires to be from Fort Worth. If it does choose to move, it would work in a temporary office in downtown by June 1st. So it's moving pretty quickly. And they would later have to lease a minimum of 30,000 square feet of space by the end of 2024. I saw somebody connect this with the John Goff development that is happening Museum Place.
Yep.
So I don't know if this is the company specifically that he had said that he was working on getting to come and relocate to Fort Worth, but John Goff, founder and chairman of Goff Capital, led Probably Monsters' $18.8 million seed round funding. So I imagine that there's some influence there as well. But Texas A&M's new campus is part of what is attractive to the company moving here and having people going through that program. But this is the type of company that we haven't necessarily seen moving to Fort Worth recently. So I think it's really cool that maybe it could be the first of many, as especially John Goff tries to make his legacy on the city.
Yeah, and $75,000 is a good starting salary. I mean,
yeah,
Fort
especially
Worth.
here.
I don't know if I sent you that article around how they showed, like, the classic clickbait news articles where it's like top 10 most affordable places to live on $100,000. Fort Worth was in there. Texas was like half of them. Arlington was one of them. So now you're talking about $75,000. That is a very good livable start in the area. So I was wondering, like, what is the overall size of the company now, and revenue? I've never heard of it. So it's also, I'd be curious to know how big of an ask is this for this company to pull off those outcomes. I mean, looking at this Business Wire article, probably amount to grow 65% in 2022, adding remote hiring in 47 states. So it seems like it is a startup that is growing quickly. The company's goals have paid off, showing an increase to 65% growth rate at a time when others are pausing or eliminating growth.
That's interesting that they are hiring remotely, but are tapping into something where they would have to lease 30,000 square feet of space. Like, I wonder if the long term is for them to stop hiring remotely, or because they would move to Fort Worth and have 30% of their hires come from Fort Worth, that they would, kind of go hybrid. But interesting strategy for them.
They raised $200 million, it looks like, in 2021. So definitely a genuine. It says raises a $200 million Series A. That's funny. That's like a big number. That's crazy. So yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, even like, with Arlington having their big e-game studio, like what sort of collaboration or development we could see just in that sector in the area from talent like that coming here.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's go ahead into the third short story. This one, we kind of been keeping track on what's been happening at the Chamber since the Chamber's CEO has left. There has already been movements. I mean, Mike Berry has been the kind of funder and runner of the Chamber since the CEO has left, and has already made a major change to split the Fort Worth Chamber by adding an economic development piece and hiring a state leader to run that, which is very interesting. It must be important enough to know that, like, Governor Abbott delivered a message talking about Fort Worth here in Fort Worth, Tarrant County, at the Texas Association of Business event, and he also talked about this new hire being a successful ad for us. I'm losing the gentleman's name.
His name's Robert Allen, former deputy chief of staff to Greg Abbott.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a win for, I think, what the economic development crowd wants out of Fort Worth. We've been losing by not having someone focusing on getting companies to come in, where the Chamber, like the other part of the Chamber, is going to focus on supporting our existing entrepreneurs and lifting them up and making sure that they're sustainable and operating. So that split, I feel like, could be good. I mean, we had an issue funding one Chamber situation, but I also wonder it being supported by someone with the state. There's going to be maybe some state partnerships, or maybe companies are going to take it more seriously because now we have a state person running it. I don't know what your take there is.
I mean, I am interested, like, not long before the previous CEO of the Chamber of Commerce stepped down, quote unquote,
which was Brandon Gingelbach back in the day.
Yeah, he had said that the Chamber was going to be part of helping the economic development team in bringing up Fort Worth's funding for trying to attract businesses to the area. Like, that was one of his big things, was that we were going to get Fort Worth competitive with other large cities when it comes to funding for trying to attract businesses to the area. And then, not very long after he puts that forward, he's all of a sudden stepping down. And so I wonder if I just wonder if that vision will continue on with this current or new Fort Worth Economic Development Corporation. I wonder if there's any sort of play here as, Fort Worth being the largest Republican-run city in the country, if getting, somebody who goes hand in hand with Abbott to be in charge of economic development here plays some sort of role in trying to strengthen those ties more and more, even as, Fort Worth becomes more and more diverse. So I don't have a ton of thoughts on what chambers of commerce actually do, or what this economic development corporation will actually do, but timing of everything and who's leaving and who's coming in seems a little insidery to me.
Yeah. This is a story we'll keep tracking and going from there. Let's go ahead and dive into the big story. I think what made you guys like last episode really well is that we had a theme, and we kind of talked about the theme early and got you excited for it, and it blended together. We didn't do that this time, but I'm now realizing maybe that's what it was that made it so good. So, this big story for us, to me, is I'm really excited as a journalist and as a nerd on the economic development piece, and I think we have an exciting story that just came out in the Economist magazine, which comes out every Thursday, and it's and the big story was Texas. And it was a big story. It's an international magazine. I would say probably one of the top 5 magazines still distributed to this day across the world. And the number one large brief story, which was it's like a 30-minute read, was about Texas, but it was also specifically about North Texas, and Fort Worth got mentioned 7 times. The mayor had a quote. Ross Perot Jr. had a quote. Alliance Texas was mentioned. Mobility zones was mentioned. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down the parts of the article. You also will have the article in the show notes, so if you wanted to follow along or read it yourself. But to me, it's just a really good. I sent it to the economic development people at Fort Worth, and they sound like they had no idea it was being dropped, but it felt like, how we always gas up something they write about that brags on Fort Worth. I was like, did y'all write this and send it to the Economist? But it sounds like, maybe the mayor's team, maybe they did it. I don't know what the strategy came from, but it was a great article. After I sent it to you, what you thought? Did you read it? What's your or the tweet thread that I gave you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your tweet summarization of it. And my thought around it, my biggest thought around it was that, any chance a right Texas politician gets, they put down California, right?
Yeah.
California doesn't think about us at all, but California is all that is on Texas's mind. Kind of the same with how Dallas doesn't think about Fort Worth at all, but
yeah, we think about Dallas.
Yeah. And there is little to nothing that Texas has done to prevent it from having the same issues that California is having long term after having such a long period of sustained growth. To me, the way that just seeing all of the numbers behind how quickly Texas is growing made me think about the Los Angeles Rams in football. They made a ton of trades signed a bunch of huge contracts a couple of years ago, traded away like all their first round draft picks for the foreseeable future to go all in to win a Super Bowl. And they did it. They were successful, like big success for them. Then this past season, they fell on their faces, won like 6 games or whatever. And now they look towards the future, and it's like they don't have any of the assets they had when they won the Super Bowl, and they don't have any assets to rebuild. Like they just got to wait it out and figure out what to do once, they get through this season. And so right now, like you said, like Texas has 7 out of the top 10 cities or whatever for living affordably, but we're really not doing much to try and maintain that, like we're just letting uncontrolled growth happen and bringing in a $33 billion surplus, largely in a lot of ways because of increased property taxes. We're not doing anything for affordable housing. We're not doing anything for public transportation. We're taking a giant shit on public schools. Yeah. We can get into the details, but my first impression was we are building up this massive thing on no foundation, and what's going to be the outcome of that in 20 to 30 years.
Definitely. Now, so Jimmy did highlight some of like the vulnerabilities in the article, and it says like these are the things Texas should worry about. But let's just hit some of the numbers of like the Texas article. So it's titled "Texas' Latest Boom is the Biggest Yet. The state is sucking in people, companies, and federal spending." So some of the big pieces, I can't go through it all. We really can't go through all the great stuff that you should probably know, but from 2010 to 2021, the population grew 22%, triple the national rate, fastest pace among the biggest U.S. cities. The economy grew by 46% over that same period. We're expected to take over Chicago in the mid-30s, and as a state, take over California in the mid-40s. We also are 35% of the country's new jobs, with 760,000 in 2020. So annually, 35% of new jobs come from Texas.
We had more exports in 2022 than Taiwan, almost a quarter of America's total exports.
Wow. Yeah.
Insane.
And then the other thing is our GDP is $2 trillion, bigger than Canada's. That's the country I was looking for. I also have like the Twitter thread in there as well. If you just want to see these stats that we're spitting off. Something that I thought too, 10% of U.S.'s public education students are in Texas. 10% of the nation's. Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
60%. So there was 60% of Texans are non-white. That was another big one that I saw. So it was just, we're talking a chapter. It's like reading 20 pages on Texas, like article.
Another one that stood out to me was, we, in a lot of ways, gaslight green energy as a state, huge. But we are one of the biggest leaders in green energy and will continue to be with all of the land and space that we have to develop solar and develop wind farms on.
Yep. It says Texas produces 43% of America's oil and 25% of its natural gas in 2021. Texas also a leader in green. It produces more wind power than any other state over the past 2 years and has led the country in solar installations, adding 6.3 gigawatts of solar farms, 85% more than California. Another one that I thought was good here was the demography compounds. It says that from 2010 to 2020, the number of white Texans under the age of 18 fell by 43%, but the overall number of under 18s grew by 413,000 because of a surge of Hispanic and African American children. So I think there's 3 takes here that I think you're right. Like this whole Texas has this we're oil. We don't need the federal government. We have our little sticks. And we're not and we don't need immigration. Let's build a wall. Mm-hmm. But all 3 of those things this article shows is false. 1, we need immigration. Actually, immigration is a quarter of our new residents. 2, that we are leading in green investing in green businesses in the country. And our state politicians don't talk about climate change is real.
Next year, we will run more off green energy than off of natural gas for the first time ever.
Yeah, crazy. And then the last one I'm missing is we get a ton of money from the federal government.
The Inflation Reduction Act will bring an estimated $66.5 billion to Texas for clean energy projects by 2030. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will ladle on a further $27.5 billion over the next 5 years, and the $52 billion CHIPS Act provides huge incentives that'll benefit Texas. Even before it became law, Samsung and TI had announced plans to spend 17 and 30 billion respectively building factories in the state.
We're in like the roaring 20s possibly of Texas. Like I think the next 2 to 3 decades in Texas is going to be really, really exciting for our generation who are young professionals who can afford to live here, own some land here, make some bets, and if this continues to grow, you know, I mean, it's just going to be a really fun time to be living in Texas. But like you said, the article did bring up vulnerabilities, like the way our politics is operated. Our public education system, I believe they said, was 47 on the list of by pay per pupil, 42nd out of 50. Texas public education system is also poor in both funding and results. The state spends $10,741 a student. It's 42nd out of 50 states.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one thing that the article points out, the state's leaders are proudly stingy and government phobic. Legislature meets for 140 days every other year, far less than in most other states. Lack of state income tax lends itself to bare bones budgets, although we have seen that our property tax is well more than enough to get the job done. Obviously, underinvestment in the electric grid, and the state is especially stingy when it comes to investing in people. We refuse to expand state-funded health care, even though the federal government pays 90% of the cost. We have the largest uninsured population in the country. And then, like you said, about their public education system, our funding ranks 42nd out of 50 states. And only 38% of fourth graders meet the required standards in math and less than 30% of them in reading. Recently, there's been small improvements, but that may be because other states were slower to reopen schools during the pandemic. So, I mean, I think that this begs the long-term conversation about Texas is like, what do we need to do to, I mean, first look at Austin and say, like, okay, we've seen what has happened in Austin over the last decade, 15 years. Do we like it? Do we not like it? What do we like about it? What do we not like about it? How do we look at our other large and mid-sized cities that are inevitably going to grow along with the state and replicate the things that we do like and fix the things that we don't like to make this growth sustainable and one that actually has long-term impact.
Fort Worth was mentioned 7 times. San Antonio, 0. Let me tell you how friendly this was to Fort Worth, Texas, this article, which is why I got really excited because, you know, when I was reading it, I was just like, man, this is a international magazine read by people who care about the global economy. And it was an entire story about not just Texas, but DFW.
And I think another thing, even in the short term, how does trying to score political points affect whether or not companies will move here? That's one thing that the article brings up, where Abbott has gone out of his way to discriminate and interfere with companies that have blacklisted gun makers from doing business with the state. Same with financial firms that have staked out environmental, social, and governance policies that seek to limit investment in oil and gas. They've said they're not welcome here. Are other large businesses going to look at partisan politics in Texas and be like, yeah, like we can't go there?
Well, that was what's funny about Governor Abbott's. He was blaming the incentives of we have to have better incentives, and he mentioned a chip company. I think it was Micron or something like that. Went to New York because they got a better incentive deal, and I was like, whoa! So Abbott, did you just say that New York was more pro business than Texas, which is why you lost that company? I don't think that's why you lost the company. I think the reason why you lost that company is because I don't know if people want to be associated with what we're culturally building here in the state of Texas. Like we don't need more incentives. I think it's probably talent. That's a big thing. More people who are moving into the state of Texas has a higher education than those who are from Texas, more likely. And so we have an education issue, a talent issue, plus a cultural brand that is more of the issue for that business part.
Right.
I also love this part of the article, that the city of Fort Worth is just one slice of the Metroplex, but has an area of 350 square miles. That is bigger than the 5 boroughs of New York City, but only 10th of the population. That is crazy.
Which it is, even today, even with all that we have already grown, like Texas is so much of a blank slate. And I think that's what makes it exciting for a lot of companies and a lot of people as they're moving here, is that you can come in and say, what do I want this to be? How do I want to have an impact? How do I want to leave my impression on this place? And that's where I hope a lot of these social decisions that we have been making over the last 10 to 15 years won't cost Texas long term, because we are kind of setting ourselves up to fail. Even though Austin is still growing, anybody who has lived in Austin long term is like, yeah, I don't really like it here anymore. It's not what it used to be. I hate going to Austin now because it's just such a nightmare to get in and get around and do anything.
Yeah.
So Houston still has area to expand. Dallas and Fort Worth, Dallas at least has the DART, which is a good foundation for their sprawl. But how does Fort Worth, how does San Antonio look at other large cities and say we're hitting the growth cycle that San Francisco has in the past? How do we make sure that we're not facing the housing crisis that they are now? Because current state, we're getting to the place where a lot of homegrown Texans can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah. No, 100%. They do tout the affordability. The cost of living is 7.5% below the national average. A big part of the housing, which is 15% cheaper than the national average. That makes a typical home in Texas 56% cheaper than the equivalent in California. But yeah.
Which that's way down to
that's comparing the most expensive to Texas.
And that's another thing that is hard with articles that talk about Texas as a state is you can go out to Podunk, middle of the nowhere, and get something for probably 50% below the national average. Yeah. But when we look at, Dallas and Fort Worth have come up multiple times on lists recently of least affordable apartments relative to the median income of the area. So when we look at our big cities, we're already at a point where people who have grown up in an education system that didn't set them up for long-term success can't afford to live on their own in an apartment here because of the cost of them.
100%. Yeah. So the part that was about Alliance and Mr. Ross Perot Jr. was one of the highlighted characters in the article. We also had Commit, the education nonprofit out of Dallas. Todd Williams is in the article. So it was just really cool for me, who's a weekly reader of The Economist, to see something like this online in the magazine. And so it's just cool to say, like, wow, I know where they're talking about. Usually they're talking about Malaysia or, another place that, like, oh, that sounds Taiwan and all these semiconductor and all that stuff. And it sounds so far away. But this is my backyard, our backyard that they're talking about in The Economist. And so I just really connected to it. So the other part is about how Perot talked about the Alliance Airport. It's owned by the city of Fort Worth, but managed by Hillwood, and how Alliance is 42 square miles. And in total, 560 companies that employ 66,000 people. A great example is Charles Schwab, a financial firm previously moved from San Francisco to the Alliance area. That was kind of a big piece of it as well. And last week, we talked about how we were worried about the city of Fort Worth and the Alliance growth. If we keep owning that airport, that's a good thing for us.
Yeah, true.
So if we keep owning it, that will keep us relevant. What else do you see in this article? Okay, I see 54 of the 500 biggest companies in America by revenue call Texas home, more than any other state. Goldman Sachs, an investment bank, is expecting to office in Dallas and become its second largest campus after the one in New York City. So when we talk about Dallas being a financial center, wow, nothing like building the brand and bringing Goldman Sachs, there.
Yeah, and one thing, just like people growth, that I was just connecting. We talked last week about how Fort Worth has a massive population of adults in Fort Worth ISD's GED program.
Mm-hmm.
So only a quarter of Texas's growth came from natural increase, the difference between births and deaths. Another quarter were immigrants, and then roughly half were arrivals elsewhere in America. A quarter of our growth are immigrants. And while it doesn't break down the population, and we know that there's a larger Asian population than we see in Fort Worth that immigrates to the area, a lot of that, as you brought up last week, are people from Latin America that, if they've got a school district that has a robust GED program the way that ours does, that could set them up for quick success after immigrating here. So for all, like you said earlier, for all that Texas hates on green energy, hates on immigration,
hates on
the federal government, those are
three things we're leading in.
Yeah, that's like so much of the foundation of how this growth is happening.
Yeah.
So it would be nice if, like, our state political leaders would stop gaslighting all of us.
Yeah. That to me was the biggest part of the article as well. And what you're saying about immigration is big. I was listening to a podcast with Peter Zeihan. He wrote a couple books that I'm a fan of. He's a American geopolitical analyst. He said 16% of Americans today have some type of connection, family-wise, to Mexico. And so the previous generations, it was like, oh, the scary, Mexico's scary. And that was national, 16%. I bet it's double if he just looked at Texas. 32%. I bet it's like Americans have some type of tie to Mexico. And so we have to stop this immigration story. And we need to turn it into a positive story about, like, how do we, because we're not having kids. We're not building more Americans, team, at the rate you want to.
Well, and even, it came up in the last couple of weeks after there was that kidnapping just across the border where I believe there was 4 people kidnapped. I believe 2 of them were killed. And, Texas came out and is like, don't go to Mexico. Mexico's dangerous. Just continuing to kind of hammer down that, like, anti-Latin America, anti-Mexican message that we get indoctrinated into growing up here. But the Mexican president, I believe, clapped back and was like, Mexico's a safer place than the U.S. And he's right. Like, very literally, he is right that Mexico is a safer country as a whole than the U.S. is. And so I agree with you that like especially Mexican rhetoric that we see all the time here is it something that really has no place.
Yeah. No, and like I said, Americans' demography will increasingly resemble that of Texas today, where already 60% of the population is non-white. Yet we're with a 38 members of Congress and a 40 electoral college votes in 2024. Around 15% of those required to win the presidency. Texas will have a mighty say in national politics. I think that's another big challenge gap for Texas. It's how much of our political officials are they don't look like the young Texans. They don't understand new Texas. They don't know how to modernize. I think this podcast is a great example of, I think our podcast sounds so foreign to some older Fort Worthian people. When they hear our podcast, they're probably like, what the heck is going on? But I feel like you and I are much of the bridge of like, we're trying to pull young people more excited about the economy, excited about politics, excited about their city, but then also being a mouthpiece to people who are trying to learn. I do give a shout out to a bunch of people who I think we probably don't align politically, but I know they listen to this podcast to get a soundboard of their own reality. And that's why it's so important for us to check our realities and have bounce boards like that of other people saying stuff that we may not always agree with. And that's not happening in Texas. I think that's one of the biggest things. It's like Governor Abbott, Dan Patrick, Paxton, they all do their thing and they know how to get the cowboy church culture to vote. And they're doing a good job trying to get Hispanic population, right? We saw those go up. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a good job of leading the Asian narrative around, Asians got disrespected in college admissions. And so now if Asian people now are starting to feel heard by Governor Abbott and Ken Paxton and all these people, who they might vote for. All of that strategy to start now trying to pull more of people who look like Black, brown, whatever, immigrants, but to believe in the indoctrination of the Governor Abbott Texas thesis. Like that's that next decade we're in right now. And how well they make us drink the Kool-Aid is going to be just based off of like how many things like the 817 podcasts fight against it, even at all costs.
Yeah. Well, overall, like, definitely take the time to read this Economist article. And like you said, this is a global publication. This is something that really isn't often America-centric, especially for their cover stories. So, I mean, really crazy to see not just Texas, but Fort Worth highlighted when the vast majority of, I would say, a number of people reading that article for the first time had either never heard of Fort Worth or had no idea that it was one of the 15 biggest cities in the country.
Yeah. The Metroplex is
over 7 million people.
Yeah, plays a big piece to the global operation. If America's going to play card dealer of globalization, the Metroplex plays a big piece on making all that happen.
Yeah.
So really, really cool story. But let's go ahead and dive into wins and losses and make sure we get the show under 60 minutes.
You go first with your loss.
I did my loss earlier. It was the stockyards.
How about the train?
Oh, there you go. The train.
Yeah,
you want me to do the train?
Yeah.
Hey, our train. Talk about it again. You know more about the train. But that's my loss. The train is being held up, and I hate that they keep using because of resources. Supply chain, inflation.
Yeah. So the Forest Park Railroad, the miniature train that starts over by the zoo and goes through Trinity Park, that has never been owned by the city. It was bought by another company a few months ago, and they were kind of given a deadline, like I believe the end of March, to get open again. And they're not going to meet that deadline. They've been given an extension into June, I believe, and they're citing quote unquote supply chains. Like, just got to use the term. Basically, it seemed like they're waiting on some like railroad ties to get in, which have a 6 to 8 week lead time. But if you had 4 months to get this open and, this thing had been evaluated for a long time before you bought it, how did you not order your railroad ties to come in 6 to 8 weeks? Like 6 to 8 weeks is not bigger than 4 months. To me, I would say loss like number one, that it's still not open yet. Loss number two is that our city should run this thing. Like our city should own this thing. Our city should make this a public amenity. And it's it's reflective of the Texas mentality that we've talked about, in that we don't want to invest in community assets. Like we want it to be privatized so that so that the local government doesn't have to shoulder any blame or responsibility around public amenities like that.
Well, I'm really excited for your loss because this is one of your favorite topics on the 817 pod.
My loss. So, not all city council candidates promise to fight fair. Here's why. My loss is not that they're not promising to fight fair. My loss is that we have some stupid, be nice to each other pledge that candidates have the option to sign. So 6 candidates signed it. It's kind of a gray area of what they're actually signing on to, basically, or if they are violating it, which is why a lot of candidates decide not to. But basically it's a thing where you sign and you say that I'm not going to be mean to my opponents. And that's the Fort Worth way, but I don't think it should be.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I feel like Fort Worth wants us to have a podcast pledge, and we're fighting to not to sign it. Your win. My win.
I'm going to do 2 wins real quick.
There you go.
First is I talked about affordable housing, but work is wrapping up on the Huntley, located on the northeast edge of downtown at 100 Harding Street, through a partnership between Fort Worth Housing Solutions and developer Stonehawk Capital. Half of the Huntley's 296 units will be set aside for those earning less than 80%
average medium
income
of the area.
Big win. We had Cielo Place open off of Race Street, 6-8 months ago, whatever. I think this is really great that we've got almost 150 affordable housing units right in downtown. That's awesome. And then my other win is an article that I'm really excited that Fort Worth Report highlighted this. I honestly hope they haven't gotten too much clapback on it, but there's a health fair in Fort Worth that aims to connect trans people to resources and each other. Safe, accessible healthcare for the trans community can be difficult to find in Texas, and probably growing more and more difficult. But Jonah Murray is the board president of Finn's Place, which is a gathering space for the trans and gender diverse community in Fort Worth.
Sounds like we need them on the pod.
I think so. The next opportunity for people in the community to connect is March 25th at the inaugural LGBTQ Community Health Fair. The free fair, which includes a panel discussion about LGBTQ healthcare, comes amid a legislative session where several bills seek to limit or ban gender-affirming healthcare. While the event centers trans people, it's also for the wider LGBTQ community, as well as friends, family, and people who want to learn how to support. No registration is required. It is, if you want more details about when and where, visit Finn's Place, FINN apostrophe S Place, on Facebook or Instagram. But just want to highlight that there are, if you are in the trans community and you feel like you're alone, like there are people in the city that are looking out for you and care about you getting gender affirming care and the care you need and the connection you need. So I thought this was really cool that Fort Worth Report highlighted this and that this event is going on next weekend.
Love it. We'll have that in the description as well for you to learn more about. And as always, I feel like you have more empathetic, nicer wins than I do. Now I have to transition to alcohol. A bill by State Senator Kelly Hancock of North Richland Hills would expand the availability of ready-to-drink spirits-based cocktails into Texas grocery and convenience stores while loosening decade-old restrictions on the Sunday sale of liquor. That sounds like a win in my book.
One thing I love about going to visit my parents in Florida is like, so Publix doesn't have like the liquor store in the Publix, but it is a part of the same building. You just have to walk outside and then, you walk into another door. And, Texas is behind the times when it comes to alcohol laws. So Fort Worth local politician, the one driving that bill, that's a win.
Yeah. All right, beautiful people. Well, thank you for listening to the 817 pod. Go ahead and read that Economist article. Share it with a rising or current leader in your org life. We need to see the real truths of our reality and how we can shape it as 817ers. Have a beautiful week, and we'll talk to you next time, which will
next
be...
Next week is our District 11 roundtable. We're excited to have a number of the candidates on, and...
I got to send them an email. I know some of them listen to the pod, so sorry if I haven't given you enough instructions yet of what this is going to look like. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what this is going to look like yet, but it will be a good time. And it'd be great practice because I think you are doing an in-person roundtable with the Fort Worth Report, like on the 28th or something like that.
Beat the Fort Worth Report to the punch. We're gonna steal all the good questions.
Hey, we'll be able to ask cool questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but I'll probably still go to the Fort Worth Report one and be there, to support my peoples. All right, take care. Next time we'll have a big pod, so get ready. Later.
Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life. Dopamine swipe. Dopamine swipe. Follow us, like double tap. Now they control your life.